ladies and gentlemen, here in this hot tent in Aix, welcome to this jewel devoted to the question of competitiveness, what renewal for Europe. As you know, the commercial stance of the European Union has been fragilized, and it's become absolutely obvious that we need to change our compass and redesign European competitiveness in light of the aging population, in light of a slowdown in productivity, and in light of our dependency on technology. So we need some kind of deep transformation set against a very taut background here in international terms, and so we're not all playing with the same rules. So what are the levers for renewing Europe? So we've got two eminent personalities with us here, and we're going to talk about the way in which we can create the right conditions for a more resilient, a more sovereign, and more competitive European model. Of course, you too, the audience, will be invited to join in the conversation later on. There'll be some questions and answers. That's part of our dual process. With us this evening, we have Jacques-Philippe. Hello, welcome to you. You're president of the board of Orange. And Jacques-Philippe GUNTHER, hello to you. You are a partner at Latham and Watkins, a very prestigious business firm. Welcome to both of you for being here for this jewel. So how can we kick off competitivity again? This is a very old debate, as old as the continent, as Europe itself. But we need to action some levers to do this. It's an urgent situation. So Jacques-Philippe, what kind of room for manoeuvre do we have? I think you're going to speak to us this evening about a diagnosis which is extremely violent, and you've got statistics to back it up. Well, we're talking about the clash of realities here in Aix. Let's take a look at the world as it is today and not how we wish it could be. I'm going to look at it from three angles. The first angle is the weight of Europe on the international stage. Back it was 29%, and in the States was 26%. Europe had a greater weight than the States. Then China joined in, and now it's 45 years later. The States still have 26%. Europe has lost 11%, it's down to 18%. Japan has gone down to 4%, and China has gone from a few percentage points to 18%. So it's at the same level as Europe. So that this lowering of the level is there. So the Americans haven't lost their place in the world. It's us, the Europeans, who've lost our place in the world, our standing. And I think we ought to be concerned about this position in Europe and the lowering ranking of France in Europe. The first figure I'd like to give you is a bit controversial, but it's the number of hours that are worked by individual. Just take a look at the number of hours worked in France and compare it with other countries, and divide that by the population. In France, it's 667 euros. That's 10 less than Spain or in Germany. It's 50% less than the European average, 25% lower than in the United States. And productivity is exactly the same. So that means that we have a problem in France in terms of wealth. But the amount of work, when we know that your retirement, which is very important, it's not the only important thing in life, but there's some people want it to start at 60 or 62, 64, whereas in reality there are European countries where retirement is 70 in some countries, and pension is a quarter of public expenditure. And in France, we don't have very many world records, but we have the highest record there. So there is a risk of France being downgraded. And there's a question of schooling as well, and schools. We know that there's PISA class ranking. It can be contested, particularly because France is not ranking very well. So when you say that the ranking isn't very high, you say that the system is wrong. But we've lost 10 places in writing, in science, and in maths as well. And in the same time, in maths. We've got all kinds of field medals. We've got amazing researchers, and there are some things which are wonderful happening. We've got French tech and all of these companies being created in technology, but we're not managing to scale them up. But something is happening in our country, but sadly, all of that is annihilated by the cost of work, which is much higher than in other countries. As you know, when we ask the French, the majority of them get the feeling that they work quite enough, thank you very much. So Jacques-Philippe, Gunther, you say that the main lever is the softening of European rules. You said to me that it's suicide for European industry to impose upon themselves constraints which others do not have. Yes, perhaps I was saying things a bit strongly there, but you may have read today in the newspaper Les Echos an article from the DG Comp in Brussels, Competition Director General in Brussels, looking over the past 4 or 5 years. And my point of view as a practitioner in the field is kind of different. So my line of thought goes towards controlling fusions, mergers, concentration of powers. When you take a look at the figures, since 1990, because the concentration rule exists since that time, we have 9,500 decisions. Out of those 9,500 decisions, the number of bans is kind of low, about 40 bans, let's say. But when you take a look at the detail, you see that the way in which the different operations are authorized by the Commission, it is quite devastating for industry. The Commission, when it's in phase 2, i.e. operations which require more time, well, those phases involve the handing over of assets. When assets are handed away, you're not sure whether the mechanism is effective. So that's the first subject for concern. When a merger is authorized in Europe, often it's disinvestment which goes along with that, and that can be negative. One complains about the deindustrialization of Europe. The toy has been broken many, many times, and the assets may be bought out by the Chinese or the Americans. The second point, and that's the duration of the analysis of these operations. Operators back in the day were saying that we can have a prior examination of a merger, and then simple operations would take 1 month. If it was a bit complicated, it could take 4.5 months. That would be fine. But today, the average duration of an investigation in a phase 2 of merger is 17 months. Between the announcement, and not even the closing, but the announce and the authorization date. So it's very, very complicated. And I think all businesses know that. We're keeping things all in the air for such a long time, for the employees, for the sales reps, for employees, everybody. It's very, very difficult to manage that. The other negative point, which also contributes to this deconstruction of competitiveness in Europe, is a lack of taking into account gains of efficiency. Industrialists will explain to the community that an operation will create efficiency gains. The regulatory tools since 2004 mean that you can take this notion of efficiency gain into account. However, since 2004, for the past 20 years, there has not been a single decision that would accept restricted competition because there is a gain in efficiency, which is good for the consumer and good for progress for our industry. A final point, which also contributes to this downgrading of Europe, and that's control over state aid. We are champions at shooting ourselves in the feet. When a European operation to support different businesses has to be authorized by the Commission, there are very lengthy processes that have to be gone through, and they're quite contrary to what will happen elsewhere. Let me give you a very simple example. In the car industry, a few years ago, it wasn't doing too well. PSA needed an injection of funds, so we had to advise of this decision, and it was subject to all kinds of remedies. PSA had to give contracts, R&D contracts to other European car manufacturers, etc. And at the same time, General Motors was also suffering. General Motors was nationalized. Now it was healthier, and then it was privatized again. And I'm not even going to talk about what happens in China. So there were solutions, and there was a little glint of optimism in there. Yes, there is a glint of optimism or hope there. But let me just give you a little glimpse into a shift which has occurred. It's counterintuitive. This was a shift in the UK since the Labour government has moved in, where we have loosened control over mergers by speeding up the process, but above all by accepting to put an end to this dogma of merger in exchange for some other commitments to invest. For example, for the telecoms sector, Hutchinson's Vodafone has a network, and we've got the telecoms network in the UK isn't top quality, isn't the best. The British competition authorities accepted a remedy which involved in 11 billion being invested into the development of the network, and so that was to the advantage of the consumer, and for 3 years to have a social offering available open to the underprivileged. So that's very concrete, and that has mixed industrial policy in with social policy, and that's what we don't have in Europe right now. And do you think that's the way that it should happen? Well, the question is, are we going to see that kind of thing in Europe? Orange, as you know, is apparently the operator in France that is for sale. And it's interesting to know whether the 3 other operators will be too strong. So it's a very difficult question. The operators have to agree about this, which is far from easy. But the competition authorities in France and Europe have. Let's come back to the telecoms question. There are 3 operators in the States, there are 3 operators in China, there are 4 in France, and there are 120 in Europe. So there is a fragmentation of the European market. And in terms of efficiency, well, there can only be efficiency if all of the networks in the different countries are optimized. But in this world where we're saturated, i.e. in the West, we're saturated. However, digital needs and speed needs are exploding, so we do need a lot of investment. But if the market is saturated, you're getting no new clients, and so the financial situation is very complex for all of the operators. So you're a bit more skeptical than Jacques-Philippe about the situation being enhanced anytime soon. Well, for 20, 30 years, I've been challenging the Commission for different reasons. If there is a glimmer of hope, well, it has to be transformed into something concrete. For the time being, there may be some signals, but there's nothing real. And this dogma of 4 operators, there were 4 in the States until several years ago, but then they decided to have only 3 operators in the States. This is something which is very powerful, and as was said earlier on, that prior authorization can be a legal guarantee. In the States, you don't need prior authorization. However, the control of not abusing a dominant position can be so violent. So another exciting another exciting debate is about the energy transition. So can this be a motor, can it be a driver to boost Europe? Well, that's a good question, because this is the favorite subject of the new commissioner, Madame Riviera, who's in charge of competition. In her speech in front of Parliament, she really did stress in the control over mergers. She stressed contributions to environment programs, to carbon footprints and all the rest of it, to make sure that the environment comes out better. And so she is following in the footsteps of the Draghi report and Madame von der Leyen's speech in front of the Parliament, integrating a bit more of industrial policy into what was a very orthodox approach to competition. So we see that the Commission is starting to take a fresh look at its guidelines in terms of competition, and also analysing the power of the market, efficiency gains, how environmental progress can create efficiency gains. For example, if you merge logistical networks and consume a little less fuel, using fewer factories, etc. So this is something which is around. We're talking about sustainability an awful lot and analysing the durability of clean technologies. So all of this is kind of new. And concentration isn't the only thing in competition rules. There are other things as well. The French authorities and the European Commission have recently both said, in fact, they sent a message to businesses saying, if you want to talk amongst yourselves about subjects that could possibly have a positive impact on the environment, do so. And if you're not sure of how, if you're not sure you're in line with the competition rules, then come and see us. So it's a kind of informal line, which follows on from a decision in the car industry, which was highly penalised because the car makers were working together on how they were going to revamp old cars. They went a bit further than just defining a European standard, and they had a fine of several hundred millions. So there's this notion of no longer simply being a policeman. If you have a question about sustainability, etc., come and see us. I think that's a kind of positive move. Jacques, are you positive as that? Well, I think these are two completely different subjects. I've been coming to Aix for 15 years now, and we know that it's not getting any colder from one year to the next here in Aix. We have to organise a transition which will use more electricity. And let me talk about some figures. As you will remember, some 15 years ago, Angela Merkel said some harsh criticism about Europe, saying it was 7% of the population, 20% of world wealth, and 50% of social expenditure in the world. I tried to do the same calculation today in terms of CO2 emissions. 7% of the population, 6% of CO2 emissions, and 40%, I would say, more or less. The figures are hard to calculate. 40% of world expenditure to combat global warming. But when you only represent 6% of world emissions, you cannot do the job on your own. And if we take a look at the 10 biggest emitters in the world, 70% of emissions, one European country is in that top 10 list, and that's Germany. So, of course, yes, we do have to do it. And we have to oblige, in inverted commas, the others to do it as well. Otherwise, well, the best way of reducing CO2 emissions in Europe is no longer to produce and get other countries to produce. You import goods that emit a lot of CO2. You import them from China. You decrease your European CO2. You increase them in China. You haven't changed the balance of what is produced around the world. However, you are shooting yourself in the foot. I think some situations need to be sorted out. It's a bit like the 35-hour working week. We were the only country here in France. It cost us a lot of money. The other countries have to do it also, particularly those countries that emit a lot of CO2. If you've got a question, wait for the microphone to reach you, and everyone will be able to hear the question. I've got a question, because the devil is in the details, of course. You're saying that pension is 27% of GDP. I read it was 14. No, I said 25% of public expenditure. But on a more serious note, Total swallowed up Elf and then Fina, and they became the 5th biggest oil company in the world. So why don't telecommunications operators do the same thing? Is there a European obstacle? Is it a question of national security? Is it protectionism? So why can something be possible in the oil industry not be possible in telecommunications industry? Is there any legislation, or is there not some way? I mean, Europe is there. Can they not oblige them to get together? It's exactly the same thing in defense. The Americans have 1 tank producer. In Germany, we have 12. In Europe, we have 12. Well, the answer is easy. We've got this commission standing in our way. Orange did 3 concentration operations in Romania, Belgium, and Spain. We're very big in Spain. Every time the European Commission forced us to make investments, and we had to help a new operator to gain market share. In Spain, it was a Romanian operator, which is also in Belgium, and it's already taken 10% of the market with our network. So there is a desire to do things. There's this myth which says it has to be transnational. But in all honesty, to be efficient, it has to be in the country. Orange merges in Spain with a local company. And we had this negotiation which lasted 17 months. And at the end of the day, we had to help another operator to get into the market. Over the past... We've got legislators who make the rules. There is a little bit of hope. I would love... just read this article in the Echoes, which I've just been talking about at the beginning, and that self-satisfaction, whereas from the point of view of some businesses, it's a disaster. And it's just chiseling away at many of companies, and telecoms is just one example. Well, over the past 10 years, in the history of telecom mergers in Europe, well, that translates into a systematic ban of 4 to 3. It's like a magic number, in a country, per country, not in Europe, but per country. Every time that an operation would reduce the number of operators to 3, the Commission obliged the country to create a 4th. So have we not come to the end of that model? We've got a new commissioner, a new general manager in charge of competition. We've got an American government following on from Biden, which was very, very hard towards American industry. Now we've got the Trump government, which seems to be a little bit more flexible, so it's easier then. They've got 5 members of the FTC. There are 2 which are Democrats. They weren't appointed, so it's better when you've got 3 Republicans. It's easier to get your decisions approved. But the hope will come from the different discourses, which I mentioned earlier on for the very first time. And for years we've been hearing about industrial policy for the very first time. In the political discourse, we have the desire to incorporate more industry and to say, yes, we're going to use weapons which are slightly more sophisticated than in the past. And let's just hope that words are followed by actions. And Jacques-Philippe will be keeping an eye on that. Thank you very much for enjoying this duel.